was born in Ankara, Turkey. I remember a lot of things. Now that I think about it, I lived in Turkey for 21 years and I lived in Canada for 44 years. And somehow those 21 years have such an impact on me when I compare it to the 44 years in terms of how I have two personalities, two sets of memories, two sets of languages, two different kind of dreams. So I remember a lot of things growing up in the Turkish society, growing up watching my dad fight for civil rights, growing up while he was not a great dad or a husband, but he was a great leader. Growing up with my mom struggling with mental health issues, but also growing up with wonderful food and my grandmother's cooking. I went to law school in Istanbul University, and it was expected of me to go to law school because my dad was a big legal mind, and so that I always wanted to be a criminal lawyer, and that's what I thought I was going to be. But then, look where I am. It was very unsafe times, actually. Quite a lot of the times the classes would get interrupted. Either the right wing or the left wing activists would come in and say, okay, we're going to go for a march, and you had no option. You just had to go because they had guns. And one of my exams, we heard this big bang outside, like at the entrance of the university, but the whole exam room shook. And there was a bomb that went off, and I think 14 people died. And when I came out of the exam, and there were all these dead bodies, it was a pretty traumatic time. I came to Canada because my then husband wanted to come do his PhD in North America, because that was the time where the promise of personal computers was coming out, and he wanted to be near the technology because he said the world is going to change with this. This is not just a normal thing. And so my job was to find a country to go to, and I did research on Canada, and we ended up in Canada. Well, my research was interesting because those days, there was no internet, there was no emails. So I wrote to every embassy, a bunch of European countries and USA and Canada, and I said, can you send me some information about your country? So they send you booklets. When I looked at the Canadian booklet, it was just this very colorful booklet of people with all sorts of colors, different racial profiles, they looked all different. And in the centerfold were a basket of peaches. And I thought, wow, a country that is so confident that they can put a basket of fruits as a centerfold. It must be some special country. So I showed up in Canada because of peaches. But it was interesting because everybody else had either a landmark, the Eiffel Tower or American flag or something. And here we had peaches. And I thought that was just for me. No. Two reasons. One is I studied under civil law. So unless you work in Quebec, you can't really do that here. And your degrees don't get recognized. It's very impossible to get recognized. So I had to go back to school to get a Canadian degree. My very first job, I started as a casual employee as a junior auditor at Public Service Commission. was just so happy to have, first of all, to have a job, right? Because if you're an immigrant, like if you don't get a job, then your life is not particularly secure for the rest of your time, because you don't know anybody. You really have no Canadian job experience. It's really hard to get hired. And so I was just so happy to have a job. And to work in the public service, I thought, I get to serve Canada. That just felt so good. And of course, I was not trained to be an auditor, but I was the junior auditor, which they gave me all of the jobs nobody else wanted to do, but I was very happy. Well, my public service commission career kind of was very short, like about maybe a year or so. And our boss at that time got a job in Agriculture Canada. So he basically took a few of us with him to agriculture. My only connection to agriculture was that my grandfather was an agronomist. But beyond that, I grew up in a very big city. And my knowledge of agriculture was the sum total of like nothing. But it was really amazing policy work. It was amazing. And they needed people who could write and summarize and analyze and frame things and write things like decks where, they were new things then. And I loved it. And the people of Agriculture Canada, at that time they were Agriculture Canada, they were just generous. Clearly I didn't fit very well because I wasn't from Guelph. I wasn't an agricultural economist, but it really brought the multidisciplinary thing into policy thinking. So I loved it, and it was just a wonderful time. My first EX job, I was the director of policy coordination in the policy branch. I think I might have just gotten to become an EX because I was a woman, because there weren't any women executives in policy branch at that time. So I think they looked around and there weren't many of us, and I was there. so I got my very first EX job. Well, my very first ADM job was, again, in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. I left as an EX2 from being the Deputy Minister's Chief of Staff to Environment. And then one day I got a call from the newly minted deputy, which I'd never met before. Had an interview with him. And a few days later, they gave me a call and said, "We would like you to come be the policy ADM." So that was my very first ADM job. So I think within 14 years or 15 years into my public service career, I became a deputy minister. Not a department, but a PCO. And I was a deputy secretary operations. And it was when Mr. Martin, Prime Minister Martin, was there. And I was in that job from Prime Minister Martin 1, Martin 2, and then to Mr. Harper. So it was really fascinating. I loved working in PCO. It was a lot of fun, and I have long-lasting relationships from my days there. I can't tell you, and even to this day, every time I walk towards the Parliament, and right where you see the Peace Tower and the building is just in front of you, I get filled with just amazing amount of emotion. It means so much to me. And I remember first time I actually went to a cabinet meeting, as an assistant secretary at that time. I was sitting next to Alan Rock, who was my chair at that time. And I think I had my mouth open looking around. Oh my God, this is just so amazing. And he leans over and he says, I think you're supposed to take the notes or something. Because I was just awestruck. And I have never taken any of my moments in any cabinet room, and even at committee rooms, which was not always fun. I always appreciated it. Leadership means to me is to be able to make a change for the better in this world, and to be able to mobilize people, organizations to get there with you. That's what it means to me. But leadership also means taking charge. Leadership also means not taking charge. Leadership can be caring. Leadership could be being tough in the face of difficult situations. It can be many, many things. But the bottom line is you try to bring positive change and in the end help Canada to do whatever it needs to do. And so that's what it means to me. The things I learned from the leaders I admired was that dogged belief that forward progress should not be compromised. Like the determination that we're going to make a change and we're going to push this for the better, and that determination and not wavering when you face obstacles, people, you name it, but really having that laser focus of going forward. I think what really I learned in a broad way is that in sometimes positions give you leadership positions, but unless you get into those shoes and become, play the role of the leader, be a leader, that is the worst part. So some people would have the shoes but not use them and not be there and or just wear them and it was about them rather than pushing anything forward or making any positive change or building an organization or being kind to their people or none of that. Like it was just, they were there, but time passed. When I did my master's, my professor, Sharon Sutherland, who actually changed my life because she taught me so many things. She taught me the basics and the fundamentals of public service and the government. Ministerial responsibility, accountability, fearless advice to ministers, role of a non-partisan public service, etc. So I lived my life, public service life, being grounded in those principles and understanding them deeply. So in that context, suddenly you're the deputy minister or something, or ADM of wherever department you are, you need to do your job. You need to do your job fully. Institutionally, I always knew what public service space was. We had to administer, which is a big deal, right? We have to deliver programs, etc. But we also have an advice function. You give the advice. And so you do those things with the best of our ability and capacity of making sure we lead our organizations to deliver those things. That's my institutional space. Where it was tricky is to actually occupy your space fully. Never shirk. I don't know, minister's office told us to do this. Well, what do we think? Like, do your job fully. Never shirk and never overreach, because we're not into partisan politics. So sometimes good relationships, etc., people can start to veer off to interesting relationships or go over that institutional space. I truly believed in that space. Oh, that's my whole management philosophy. On my desk there, I have these two little red high heel shoes. They're tiny, this little. A friend of mine had given them to me, and I think of that as my management philosophy. So if you're in a position where you're supposed to lead and manage a group of, it can be 3 people, 4 people, 400 people, 4,000 people, there are types of leaders that, or managers in this case probably, they jump into the power shoes and stomp around, I'm the boss. And those people never get good advice from their people because everybody is scared of them. Most of their people really wouldn't go the extra mile for them. And they can't really, my experience is, unless they're super duper innovative and they're changing the world, if they're just like mediocrely pushing something along, nobody's going to follow them. Then there are others who have the shoes, they don't get in there, they want to be everybody's friend, they don't want to make the hard decisions, they don't want to do the negative feedback. It's just, that's hard. So the best style, in my view, was to get into the shoes, own the space, but as you get more senior, walk very lightly in those shoes. Public service advice is non-negotiable. That doesn't mean that it is always accepted. But if you're giving advice, you have to first of all make sure that it is good advice. It actually has the good analytics. It is actually considered the context within which this advice is going to land in, which is not easy. But once it's done, then you have to give the advice. There's no point in negotiating your advice as to what your advice should be so that the paper trail looks different. That doesn't work in my mind. I think that was never a problem for me because I always had great relationships and good trust-based relationships with my ministers. And therefore, the advice was received, not always agreed to, but it was always received and heard. A lot of people talk about fearless advice, and I think it is an easy phrase to use. It's a really hard thing to practice. The fearless part I'll get to, but the advice part is that advice has to be the right advice. Advice has to be well considered. It can't be completely tone deaf of, for example, the political realities or financial situation, etc. I can give any advice. I could say, you go and buy this for $10,000. Well, if you have no money, that's the wrong advice, right? So it has to fit into the context. So advice has to be good. The fearless part, I find it is hard because when you're giving advice that especially nobody wants to hear, and it actually maybe goes against what is generally expected of you to give, then you have to be at peace with standing alone, which is hard. You have to really not worry about yourself, because sometimes you give these advice and some people who have control of your career don't like it. And that's okay, but you have to be at peace. The fearless part is hard, but it is doable, but you have to really think about it as to what grounds you. You have to be grounded in the principles. At least that's how I managed. I was a relatively new deputy minister, maybe 9 months, and there was a ministerial shuffle. So I go to meet the new minister at the Rideau Hall, and awkward handshakes. He doesn't know, and my name is really difficult. And I had checked him out, and I wasn't very sure of him either. So we kind of, not great first warm introduction. So I went home and I prepared my notes as to what I was going to tell to the minister at our one-on-one bilateral get to know each other meeting. So I'm on a send mode. So then I started to think, probably this is absolutely the wrong approach to any relationship, because you can't just go and tell people what they were supposed to do and how they're going to be briefed, etc. So instead I went and respected his position, bought 2 coffees, sat in front of him, and I said, look, minister, you don't know me and I don't know you, but I want you to know this. I'm always going to tell you the truth. I'm always going to give you the best advice that I think we're capable of, and I'm always going to have your back. Now tell me what your priorities for this department. We talked. It was great. Towards the end, the minister turns to me and says, but you'll tell me when I'm wrong, right? And I said, absolutely. And that was the beginning of a relationship based on trust and based on respect. It is not a friendship. It is not a family relationship. It's a different professional relationship where you have to trust each other. You're a partner. But at the same time, there's a natural tension there, and you have to be able to figure that out. The 2008-9 economic crisis it's a shock to the whole world, and it's a shock to the economy. It was the most unknown situation that you could have for me at that time. And I got shuffled to transport infrastructure communities right in the middle of the crisis. And it was one of those no-fail missions. And I really hadn't worked in that portfolio ever. And it was probably one of the best jobs I ever had, because there was a real crisis and there were things we could do. We had the stimulus package and it had to be delivered. And it had to be delivered well, and it had to be delivered without, hopefully, not getting a lot of wrong things in wrong people's hands. And we had to deliver well, because it actually created jobs. So it was while the world was burning, I remember us just hunkering down and doing what we can do to actually contribute to getting onto the other side of the economic crisis. So it was amazing. That's why I love public service so much, because you end up being in a situation where you can actually do something that actually can help people go through really, really hard time. So that was one of the most amazing times. Of course, I was tired, senseless, etc., but I had the most amazing team, and it was just great. Transitions are very tricky times for public service. But at the same time, it's an opportunity for renewal, because transition planning, you generate new ideas. You renew public service thinking in many ways, because you have no constraints of, one party or the other party or other party. It's you basically have broad, you can think about where's the world going, what policies do we want to recommend to a new ministry. I think that's an opportunity. So I find that part interesting. But once the new administration comes in, first of all, you have to treat the people who are leaving with respect and, I don't want to say compassion, but you have to show them the right amount of care because they are public servants too. Political people are public servants in a different institutional role. So you have to recognize that they have actually done this for their country. And the incoming people, you have to be able to hear them because they got elected on a platform, they got elected by Canadians. So you have to respect that space and you have to really understand where they're coming from. Sometimes if you've been doing this, going this way so long and the government changes, it's just so easy to say, well, yeah, but your idea doesn't make that much sense because of the following 200 reasons. That's kind of a knee-jerk reaction that happens because we've been going this way so long, now we have to go that way. So that's why I always think that it's important to pause and hear who this new government is. What do they stand for? What are their fundamental values? What are they trying to do for the country? Once you can get that, the rest is easier. First of all, as a deputy minister, you always you're one letter away from resignation. So that's not a big deal. And you should be at peace with that because staying at all costs is not particularly worthwhile for who you are as a person, at least for me. That's why I was the fear part. I dealt with the fear part. I didn't say that I didn't have fear of, losing my job, etc. But I think I was at peace with that. Second thing is that you're never truly alone. Build a community, get to know people, have friends who can help you, support you, even if you can't talk to them about everything. There are people, you should have people who can give you advice or just listen to you. I always had Morris Rosenberg I'll talk to when I had policy problems, Margaret Biggs because she was my girlfriend. I always had people in my life who can help me just sustain myself. The other advice I'll give is the system is there to help you, but you have to know how to mobilize the system. So use the system to help you, get them to help you, but be really planned, know the environment you're in. Because I think a lot of problems can be better solved if you actually engage the right people and the right tools in the right situation, right descriptions, but then come to the solution. First of all, my name is Yaprak, and the Canadian flag is a maple leaf. So I kind of think that this was a love match made in heaven for me. And I am grateful. I am grateful that this country actually would give a life to an immigrant Muslim woman who kind of knew nobody and had not much, and give this person an opportunity to have a career like I had, and then also have a life like I had. I am so grateful for everything I have in my life, and none of it would have been possible without Canada giving me that opportunity. Never be cynical, because I think Canadians deserve better from their public service. Never be cynical. Never take your work for granted and just do it halfway. Always go the extra mile and do more because you work for Canadians. And it's an honor to be a public servant. Not every day will be great. And now I have all these stars in my eyes about my public service career. I'm sure I had horrible days, probably I had horrible years probably. But you're there to do a job. And it's not just the job. It's a job that could make a difference. Never forget that.